Let's begin the next session, session 6, titled Short-Term Strategy. Let's have a look at what we'll be covering in this session. We'll begin with meditation. We'll continue with the Vipassana practice of emptiness, focusing on the mind. We'll use a slightly different approach in this one than we did in the last session. And then a short topic about past. From this perspective of dependent arising, then past doesn't exist objectively. It exists relative to present and future. And it seems like, though, that the past is already finished and it's fixed, it's objective, but seems like also in particularly quantum physics, this view is being challenged a little bit. So we'll have a look at that, titled You Choose Your Past. Then we'll follow that with a short review of some of the earlier points. Then we'll look at the two strategies in terms of a long-term and short-term strategy. Then we'll look at in detail some short-term strategies that we can use together with this Vipassana practice of emptiness. And then as part of that short-term strategy, we'll do a meditation in terms of how to deal with attachment as part of that short-term strategy. Time for question and answer at the end of the session. Now, the Vipassana practice here we'll do, again, we'll use a quote from Padmasambhava as a basis for this practice. And he says, while steadily gazing in the space in front of you, without meditating on anything, steadily concentrate your consciousness without wavering. This is the shamatha practice of resting in awareness. Generally recommended to have the eyes open for this practice. And then on that basis of just simply resting in awareness, we're going to engage in Vipassana. We're going to investigate. And he says, occasionally seek out, what is that consciousness that is concentrating? Steadily concentrate again and then check it out again. Do that in an alternating fashion. If it is the mind, ask, what is that very agent that releases the mind and concentrates the mind? And steadily observe yourself, then release again. In this practice, Vipassana practice, we are going to investigate the agent, the observer. There really seems to be, in this practice, seems to be an agent behind everything, an observer who's doing all of these things. But where is that agent or observer? Also, he talked here about alternating fashion. With this Vipassana practice, then we alternate with shamatha. We do a little bit of investigation, we rest in shamatha. Then we investigate again and rest. So we alternate. And that's going to be very helpful doing that process. And we'll do a little bit of that in this meditation as well. Let's do that practice. Finding a nice, comfortable posture, let's begin. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And with each out breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen. And then simply releasing all appearances, allowing the mind to come to rest. Not meditating on anything. Not doing anything at all. Simply rest in awareness itself, knowing that you're aware. All sorts of appearances will continue to arise. Thoughts, emotions, sounds, and so on. But now pay no attention to any appearance. We're not trying to block them. Let them be there. They can be there. We're just not interested in them. The only thing we're interested in is knowing that we're aware. So just rest in that experience of awareness itself. And if you're finding that you're getting caught up in any agitation, tension, or distraction, then release awareness into space, releasing all appearances and relaxing completely. Who is releasing awareness into space? Who is doing that? Just look. And then rest again, resting in awareness. And if you're finding that you're falling into dullness or drowsiness, then arouse and refresh your focus, sharpen your focus, concentrate, knowing that you're aware. Who is concentrating the mind? Who is the agent doing that? Just look. And then relax again, resting in awareness. Who is resting in awareness? Who is the agent or the observer resting in awareness? Just look. And if there is an observer, an agent, does that mean there are two awarenesses? The one that is observing and the one that's being observed? And if there is no observer, no agent, then who is it that knows that? And then release all investigation and allow the mind to come to rest. Simply resting in that open, spacious stillness of awareness. And we can bring the meditation to a close. Let's begin by looking at past. There seems to be an objective past there, and fixed. But here we have an interesting quote again from John Wheeler, that theoretical physicist we quoted from earlier. He says, "It is wrong to think of past as already existing in all detail. The past is theory. The past has no existence except as it is recorded in the present. By deciding what questions our quantum registering equipment shall put in the present, we have an undeniable choice in what we have the right to say about the past." Very interesting statement. And on the basis of that statement, I've got a long quote here from Alan Wallace from his Mind in the Balance. And he's expanding on this, and he says, "Some contemporary physicists go even further in challenging the commonplace assumptions about the history of the universe. Applying the principles of quantum physics to the whole of nature, Stephen Hawking of the University of Cambridge and Thomas Hertog of CERN have proposed that there is no absolutely objective history of the universe as it exists independently of all systems of measurement and conceptual modes of inquiry. Instead, there are many possible histories, among which scientists select one or more based on their specific methods of inquiry. Since the dawn of modern science, physicists have been trying to understand the evolution of the universe from the bottom up, starting with the initial conditions. Today, the beginning of the universe is conceived in terms of the Big Bang. But Hawking and Hertog challenged this entire approach, declaring that, like the surface of a sphere, our universe has no definable starting point, no defined initial state. And if you can't know the initial state of the universe, you can't take a bottom-up approach working forward from the, quote, beginning. The only alternative is to take a top-down approach, starting from current observations and working backward. But how you do this depends entirely on the questions you ask and the methods of inquiry you adopt in the present. When we apply the principles of quantum physics to the entire universe, as Wheeler and Zeilinger advocate, the whole of nature exists in a quantum superposition state consisting of an infinite array of possibilities. According to Hawking, every possible version of a single universe exists simultaneously in that quantum superposition. When you choose to make a measurement, you select from this range of possibilities a subset of histories that share the specific features measured. The history of the universe, as you conceive of it, is derived from that subset of histories. In other words, you choose your past. So very interesting indeed. Let's follow that with a little review of one of the main points from yesterday. And that is, we looked at how this making boundaries, how grasping onto an independent me and an independent objective world was the root cause of our mental afflictions and suffering. And so we had this 6-step process here. So we saw at step 1 that the seed of ignorance was this habit of grasping, the habit of making boundaries out of lines. And then when we look out on the world, everything appears to exist independently of us. So there seems to be this subject-object duality, what's here called mistaken dualistic appearance. And so everything always appears to us in this way. So we never question these appearances. We just simply accept. Yes, there is an independent objective world there, an independent subjective me here. So now we've turned lines into boundaries. We don't question appearances, and we're grasping onto an independent me, independent world, full of separate, discrete things. And we saw there yesterday that when we experience any experience, we have this mental factor of feeling, which is experiencing things as either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And we saw there that pleasant, unpleasant, neutral feeling together with this mistaken view that the world is existing objectively, leads to step 3. Because if I'm looking at, again, using the example of a flower, and I'm having a pleasant experience, together with the belief that that flower exists there objectively, then that will lead me to assume there must be some attractive quality there causing my pleasant experience. We'll see that as inherently attractive or attractive from its own side. Or if we have an unpleasant experience, together with the belief that that flower is existing there objectively, that will lead us to assume there must be some unattractive quality there causing my unpleasant feeling inherently unattractive or inherently neutral, as the case may be. And so once we have this misconception that the beauty and ugliness is there objectively, then that leads to the 4th step. Because if I'm having a pleasant experience, I like pleasant experiences, I want pleasant experience, that flower seems to be causing my pleasant experience, I want that flower, attachment. Or if I'm having an unpleasant experience when I see that flower, I don't like unpleasant experiences, I don't want them, that flower seems to be causing my unpleasant experience, get it out of here, aversion. And then also confusion, which was another name for ignorance if we're having neutral experience. These are the 3 core mental afflictions, called the 3 poisons. All other mental afflictions come out of one of those or a combination of them. They are driving our behavior. And the Buddha's assertion is that every action we do based on a mental affliction has a consequence, has a result. And the result is our experiences. Collectively, the Buddha described using the word dukkha, here translated as suffering. And so we saw there that if we want to overcome mental afflictions and suffering, we have to go back to the root cause, which is ignorance, this grasping, this making boundaries, grasping onto independent existence. To overcome that, we engage in the Vipassana practice of emptiness. That is the long-term strategy. That could take some time before we eliminate that ignorance. While we're working on that, it would be helpful to have, in addition to that long-term strategy of Vipassana practice of emptiness, it would be helpful to have an effective short-term strategy to at least reduce the impact of these mental afflictions and suffering. And that's what we're going to look at now. But before we do that, one more point here on this chart. We said that when we look out on the world, things appear to exist independent of us, but that's not really how they exist. But the question might be then, well, if that's not how they exist, why do they appear to exist independent of us? And that is, again, due to ignorance. We see here in this chart that every time we're grasping, we have this ignorance, we're grasping onto independent me, independent world, that will reinforce the habit. So that's the seed. But also there's a side effect of this grasping, and that is that ignorance stains our mind, what's called latencies of ignorance. And those stains of ignorance in our mind, what they do is that whenever we come into contact with an object, then that object appears to exist completely independent of us, i.e. mistaken dualistic appearance. So what we could say in a way is that we're looking out on the world through this filter of ignorance, these stains of ignorance, and therefore everything that appears to exist completely independent of us. So therefore, again, 2 strategies are important. One, the long-term strategy to really overcome all mental afflictions and suffering is we need to eliminate that root cause. We see that in Nagarjuna's quote here, that elaborations, or in other words, ignorance, will cease through cultivating emptiness. That could take some time before we eliminate all that ignorance. Therefore, while we're doing that, then to have an effective short-term strategy to at least reduce the impact of this 6-step process, particularly in terms of mental afflictions and suffering. So let's have a look at what we can practically, in a practical way, do now to reduce the impact of that process, because we really don't want to have that suffering arising. Let's first look at what sort of strategies we can have at step 1 to avoid going to step 2. Step 1, we have the seed of ignorance. We have the habit of grasping onto things existing independently. We've had that habit since we were born, and from a Buddhist perspective, well before that. And we're looking out on the world, and everything we see appears to exist completely independent of us. We're having this mistaken dualistic appearance. So the question is there anything we can do here now to avoid grasping onto those appearances? In other words, turning lines into boundaries. Is there anything we can do? What we can do is we can question appearances. Now we don't question appearances because seems to be no reason, because everything seems to exist independent of us. That's the only way things have appeared to us, so we never question appearances. But now that we've come to understand emptiness, we can start to question appearances and go, well, the world looks like it's independent, but based on my understanding and practice of emptiness, I know that things do not exist as they appear. Therefore, we can start to see things as like an illusion, meaning things are not existing as they appear. And if we can start to do that in daily life, we can start to at least reduce this grasping, this ignorance, making boundaries. To do that, questioning appearances, we need to understand a little bit about emptiness. We have to have a little bit of an understanding of the view of emptiness. Otherwise, we would never question. But there's one thing we can even do before step 1, and that is that if there are certain situations, certain people or objects that whenever we come into contact with them, we always get overwhelmed in a negative way, then as part of an effective short-term strategy, then in the short term, to not unnecessarily go into those situations. We're not talking about running away from difficult situations. That's never a long-term solution. But it could be a strategic short-term strategy, knowing that whenever we go into those situations, we always react in a negative way. That's not helpful. So as much as possible to avoid those heavy negative situations where we always react in a negative way. And while doing that, then we cultivate our capacity to be able to deal with those more difficult situations in future. We strengthen that capacity so that later we can go into those more difficult situations and effectively deal with them without getting overwhelmed. So I think that can be very much part of an effective short-term strategy. But let's say we didn't question appearances and we got to step 2. So step 2, now we've turned our line into a boundary. We're seeing the world as made up of many separate, discrete things, and we're experiencing something, and we're having a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling when we're having that experience. Is there anything we can do at step 2 to avoid going to step 3, this misconception? And then going on to step 4, which is the attachment, aversion, and so forth. And one very effective thing we can do at step 2 is simply observe those feelings. And there's a lot of emphasis put at this stage in many Buddhist traditions, because this is a very effective point where we can cut this process by not allowing ourselves to react to those pleasant, unpleasant experiences, neutral experiences. Therefore, to simply observe pleasant, unpleasant, neutral feelings as they arise. To be able to do this, we need mindfulness, because otherwise what will happen is stimulus reaction. Some pleasant stimulus comes, we react with attachment. Some unpleasant stimulus comes, we react with aversion. It will happen very quickly and will just perpetuate the cycle. So we have a little window of opportunity between when the stimulus first comes and when we react with attachment, aversion, and so forth. And here's a very nice little quote from Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and neurologist, and also a survivor of Auschwitz. And he says the following: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. We normally can't take advantage of that space because that's a very short time and we don't have mindfulness to be able to catch that window of opportunity. That's why, one of the reasons why shamatha practice is so important, that if we want to be able to take advantage of this process, technique here at step 2, we need mindfulness. If we really cultivate and strengthen mindfulness in shamatha practice, then we will be able to do something here at step 2, that we'll simply be able to watch pleasant, unpleasant feelings arise without reacting. And then we have that, we have the ability to choose our response rather than react out of habit. And that in that way, there is our growth and our freedom from mental affliction. So this is an excellent point to break the process. But let's say we didn't manage to do that and we got to step 3. Now at step 3, things are really seeing, based on our pleasant, unpleasant, neutral experience, things seem to be so attractive, unattractive, or neutral from their own side. We have that misconception arising. What can we do to avoid then reacting to that with attachment, aversion, and so forth? Again, here at step 3, like step 1, we can start to question appearances. For example, let's say we're looking at a flower and it looks very attractive, and we've got to step 3. The flower really looks objectively attractive from its own side. What we can do here at step 3 is question appearances. Where is that beauty in that object that seems to be there? So we can look, we can investigate the flower. Where is the beauty objectively in the flower? Is it this sort of color? Is it this part of the petal? Is it this? Is it that? And we can question that, and we can come to see then there is no beauty there objectively, that we are creating the beauty based on our pleasant experience by interpreting that collection of data in that way. So we can come to see and realize that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or if it's an unpleasant experience, ugliness is in the eye of the beholder. And if we can come to this understanding here, then attachment and aversion can't arise because there's no beauty there objectively to become attached to. There's no ugliness there to have aversion to. And so again, we'll have that window of opportunity to respond in a good way rather than react with attachment, aversion, jealousy, and so forth. But let's say we didn't manage to do that, and now we're at step 4. And now we're starting to have some reaction. We're having some attachment, aversion, confusion, jealousy, some sort of mental affliction now is arising in our mind. What can we do at stage 4 to avoid reacting based on that mental affliction? Saying and doing things that we're going to regret, saying and doing things that are just going to lead to a lot of suffering. Again, like step 2, the feeling step, is simply observe the attachment, aversion, whatever mental affliction arising. Again, we have this little window of opportunity to be able to choose our response rather than react in a very inappropriate way. Again, to be able to do this, we need mindfulness. If we have mindfulness, then we'll be able to catch the mental affliction such as attachment, aversion, jealousy, or whatever early while we've still got control of our mind. And if we can watch that mental affliction, we're free of it. We're not caught up in it. It can't go anywhere. We won't react. It will simply arise and pass. Very effective. In addition to simply observing mental afflictions, we can do a couple of other things. One is we can apply antidotes to the mental affliction. For example, if attachment is arising, one good antidote is impermanence, to come to see that the thing that we're trying to grasp onto and hold is changing moment by moment. And then there's nothing for attachment to grab hold of and it will dissipate. Or if anger is arising, then the one good antidote is practice patience. Simply remain calm. In addition, we can also, like step 1 and 3, we can also question appearances here. Is that we can look for what's called the 3 spheres, meaning we can either look for the object, the mental affliction, or the me that is having the mental affliction arise. So again, let's say we're looking at a flower and some attachment is arising, then we can look for the flower. Where is the flower to be found objectively there in the basis? Or where is the attachment to be found that is arising in my mind? Or where is the me that is having this attachment arising? And so we can do this investigation at any one of those 3 points to come to an insight into emptiness with respect to the me, the object, or the mental affliction. And then based on that, the mental affliction will dissipate. So this also can be very effective. But again, to be able to do this, we need to have view of emptiness, and we need to have some experience of emptiness to be able to do this effectively. But let's say we didn't manage to do any of these things at step 4, and now we're at step 5, we're acting on those mental afflictions. And let's say, and I want to just focus here on harmful behavior. So our mental afflictions of attachment, jealousy, anger, hatred, whatever, is leading us now to engage in harmful, negative behavior. What can we do at step 5 to avoid going to step 6? That is to avoid experiencing the suffering arising from those actions. The Buddha's assertion is that every negative action we do will later result in us having some sort of suffering experience. We don't want those suffering experiences. So what can we do, having done an action, to avoid experiencing the result later? And the answer is to purify our mind of these negative imprints and our negative habits. And one effective way to do that is through what's called the 4 opponent powers. Meaning that if we've done something negative, something harmful, then we go through these 4 opponent powers. The first thing is to have sincere regret for having done that negative action. That's already weakening that imprint and the habit of doing that action. Regret is not guilt. Guilt is completely useless, and it's based on an invalid perspective. Because if we've done something harmful and we feel guilty, what are we focusing on? Bad me, bad me. And that is a false, invalid perspective, and all that does is it makes us feel bad and it paralyzes us, and it's not even addressing the negative behavior. So guilt is completely useless. Whereas if we've done something harmful and we regret, what are we regretting? The behavior. So then we're not fusing ourselves with our behavior, but we are acknowledging simply, I have done this negative behavior. And so regret can lead us to overcoming that negative behavior. So regret is very useful. Then in addition, the second opponent power is called reliance. Reliance is sometimes translated as foundation. We all have a certain foundation or a certain positive direction that we're trying to follow our life. If we've done some harmful behavior, we've fallen down from that foundation. So reliance here is all about picking ourselves back up and reaffirming our positive direction in our life. And that will also work to counter that negative imprint, negative habit. The third thing we can do is remedy. Think of some sort of practical remedy for the negative behavior we did. For example, if we verbally abuse someone at work, then a practical remedy is apologize to that person. And the fourth thing we can do is resolve. Make a strong determination not to do that negative behavior again. And we need to be very practical with this, because if the negative behavior is something we do maybe many times every day, there's no point in saying, I'm never going to do it again. That's not going to happen. So if it's a very strong habit, set a time limit and say for the next day, I'm not going to do that negative thing. If that's way too much, for the next hour, I'm not going to do that thing. If that's way too difficult, for the next 5 minutes, I'm not going to do that thing. So pick an amount of time that with effort, normally you can manage. And then over time, you can increase it from 1 hour to 1 day to a week, a month, a year, the rest of our life. In that way, we can even start to break strong negative habits. Therefore, if we do all of these 4 opponent powers, whenever we notice we've done something harmful, something negative, that is really going to help purify our mind of those negative imprints and negative habits. But let's say we didn't manage to do that, and now we've got to step 6 and we're suffering. And here again, I want to just focus on unpleasant, painful experiences. So in the moment, an unpleasant, painful experience is arising. Can we do anything to reduce the amount of suffering? There's a number of things we can do. The first thing we can do is what's called acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean resignation. Acceptance simply means to acknowledge that in the present moment, I'm experiencing this unpleasant experience. Normally, if we have something unpleasant, what often happens is immediately we have aversion. We go, oh no, not that, go away, go away, go away. And all that aversion does is it magnifies our suffering that we experience. By practicing acceptance, we can overcome aversion and thereby at least not increase the amount of suffering that we experience. To do this, again, we need mindfulness. Otherwise, we're just going to, as soon as something unpleasant happens, we're going to react with aversion. But if we have mindfulness, we can notice the unpleasantness coming up, and then instead of reacting, then we can respond in a better way. How we can respond? We can use advice from Shantideva, great Indian master. He says, if a situation can be remedied, why get upset? Just fix it. And if a situation cannot be remedied, what's the use in getting upset? Doesn't help. Very good advice to follow. What we can do in addition is we can use impermanence to help by understanding that this too shall pass. Because often if we're having some unpleasant experience, it seems like it's going to last a long time, and then we induce more suffering on ourselves. But if we can simply think, okay, I can't solve this at the moment, it will pass, then at least we won't increase the amount of suffering we experience. Again, here we can question appearances as earlier steps and simply look for the me who's experiencing this suffering. Because actually, pain is mandatory, suffering is optional. Pain being certain intense, unpleasant, let's say, sensations in the body, but suffering is optional. For us, suffering is not optional. Suffering is mandatory because we're grasping. So whenever something unpleasant comes up, we have some pain or unpleasant in the body, for example, we grasp, oh me, I'm suffering, oh, I got this pain, then we suffer. If we can release that grasping, then the pain will not become suffering. One other thing we can do in addition to that, but to be able to do that, we need the view of emptiness again, to question this appearance. Where is the me who's experiencing this? And then release that grasping through the emptiness practice. One more thing we can do here is we can make that difficult situation meaningful. Because often when we're faced with some unpleasant situation, we tend to narrow our focus and have an obsessive focus on me. Poor me, poor me, poor me. And generally then often with that aversion going, oh no, I don't want that, go away, go away, go away. And then we just magnify suffering. Therefore, practice acceptance, but in addition to acceptance, we can use this difficult situation and make it meaningful by understanding that there must be many other people on the planet at the moment who are having a similar experience. So by me accepting this experience, accepting doesn't mean don't fix it. If we can fix it, we fix it. If we can't fix it, it'll pass. But then we can say, by me accepting this negative experience, may all others be free of theirs, and take their negative experiences from them and give them happiness. This is a Tong Len practice that I think many of you are familiar with. We did that in the compassion retreat, and we'll actually do that practice again in the last session today. Those are some of the things we can do if we face some unpleasant, painful experience, and not reduce suffering, make it meaningful. Those are some of the short-term strategies that we can do starting now throughout our life to help reduce the impact of this process, to help reduce mental afflictions and suffering. So summarizing again, the long-term strategy here is to extinguish all mental afflictions and suffering through this Vipassana practice of emptiness. The short term is to start to reduce mental afflictions and suffering. To do that, we saw important mindfulness, particularly at step 2 and 4. Therefore, to have that window of opportunity, we need to cultivate mindfulness, therefore the importance of shamatha practice, so that we can catch the window of opportunity and respond rather than react. Questioning appearances, we saw that at step 1, 3, and 6. To be able to start to question appearances, we need this Vipassana practice of emptiness. We need some understanding and experience of that to be able to start to question these appearances. Applying antidotes to mental afflictions. Purifying the mind of negative habits, negative imprints through the 4 apparent powers. And then using suffering to cultivate compassion for others. So these are some of the core short-term strategies we can use whilst we're working on the long-term strategy of the Vipassana practice of emptiness. So let's go now to a meditation of dealing with attachment based on some of these ideas of these various short-term strategies. So this meditation is helping us to start to develop this short-term strategy for, in this case, particularly being able to deal with attachment. We already did this meditation earlier in the compassion retreat, but particularly in the context here of Vipassana, it's very helpful to go through this again. So let's do this practice. Find a nice comfortable posture. Let's begin. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. Allowing the body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. The breathing flowing naturally and effortlessly. And setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Allowing it to come to rest in the present moment. Resting in stillness. Let's now have a look at some ways of dealing with attachment. Remember, attachment is defined as a mental factor that sees its object as attractive. It then exaggerates the object's attractiveness and thus wishes to possess and hold it. Why? Because it believes it to be the source of our happiness. And we can begin by thinking of a specific person or thing that seems to be crucial to your happiness. And then imagine that you actually have that person or thing and you're holding on tightly, not wanting to lose that person or thing. And picture that scene clearly. Desperately holding on to that person or thing, not wanting to lose them. How do you feel? Is your mind relaxed and calm? Does that person or thing have the power to bring you the lasting happiness that you seek? And now, if you mentally relax your grip on that person or thing, allowing it to just be, allowing some space. How do you feel? More relaxed and calm? Without the clinging, are you more able to enjoy the presence of that person or thing? And again, allow some attachment to that person or thing to arise. Now, instead of focusing on that person or thing, look directly at the attachment itself. What is the nature of that attachment? Is it something solid and concrete? Or does it change over time? And if we look directly at attachment itself in this way, does attachment have any power over us? Do we need to fight with attachment? Or are we free of attachment? And will it simply start to dissolve? And now recall that the person or thing you're attached to is impermanent, changing from moment to moment, in a constant state of change. not remaining the same from one moment to the next, constantly changing. In seeing this, check whether your attachment towards that person or thing remains the same. Now imagine that person or thing changing over time and becoming very old. And again, check whether your attachment toward that person or thing remains the same. And again, imagine the person or thing you're attached to clearly in front of you. What is it exactly that makes that person or thing so attractive, so desirable? Try to pinpoint precisely what it is that is so attractive and so desirable. Now try to think of someone else who may not see that person or thing as desirable or attractive. Is their perception invalid? Are you seeing that person or thing in the correct way while they are mistaken? Or is it that due to your own experience, you are correctly labeling that person or thing as pleasing or attractive? And that due to the other person having a very different experience, they are correctly labeling that person or thing in a totally different way. And then due to your labeling the person or thing as attractive, are you then going on to seeing that person or thing as attractive from their own side, objectively attractive? And as a result, do you develop some attachment, thinking that that person or thing is the source of your happiness? Nothing is inherently one way or another. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And by understanding this, then whether it is a relationship with another person or simply eating a delicious piece of chocolate cake, we won't cling to that experience. And as a result, we will enjoy that experience more fully. Then in conclusion, recognize that it's possible to practice these methods of letting go of attachment. And that when we do, we will feel more balanced and free to enjoy things without clinging. More balanced and free to enjoy and improve our relationships with others. And make a strong determination to do so. And we can bring the meditation to a close. You have some time now for question answer. Anyone have any questions about anything from this session?
Glenn, there was one question regarding the Alan Wallace quote that was following the John Wheeler quote. If you could mention
Sure.
this.
What's the question?
It was about the source from which that quote came.
Yes, it's from his book, Mind in the Balance. So you can find it in that book. Any other questions anyone has? We've got a little bit of time before we break for lunch.
There's another question in the chat from Pamela.
Mm-hmm.
Glenn, what do you think of Donald Hoffman's view that this underlying ignorance is there as a result of evolution because it has served our survival not to see things as they truly are?
I'm not sure that's exactly what he says. That I think what he's saying there is that what's it called, fit for purpose. I can't remember the term he uses now, but basically, we talk about evolution, survival and procreation, and it would seem plausible or sensible that as part of that process, that to be able to survive and procreate better, we should be therefore getting better and better at seeing reality as it is. And what he showed actually mathematically was that that's not the case. In fact, that seeing reality as it is doesn't assist in that process of survival and procreation. And he was even suggesting, I think, that it drives that to extinction, the process of that. But that's, I'm not sure he was suggesting that evolution created ignorance. I think what he was suggesting was that in the process of evolution, the seeing reality as it is no advantage in that process. And therefore, we haven't, as you would maybe think, through the process of evolution, became better and better at seeing reality as it is. I think that was his main point there. Any other questions? Still got a few minutes left. Okay, if there's no questions, then we'll break there for lunch. After lunch, so we've got a little bit over an hour now for lunch. The next session will be looking at the summary of practice. So we'll be going through some of the main Vipassana practices, but also from the earlier Vipassana retreat as well. And as part of that, we'll also be looking at the stages of progress that we go through in this Vipassana practice as well. So that'll be part of the next session. We'll continue some more Vipassana meditations. We'll go back and do another Vipassana practice on person. Where is the meditator that seems to be here? And also another Vipassana practice on searching for the mind. So that's coming in the next session. So let's break there for lunch.